Hello everyone, I'm Matt from MediaMatt, and today we'll be tackling, finally, the Jaws franchise as a whole, starting with the one that started it all, Jaws. Released in 1975 and directed by Steven Spielberg, Jaws was a monumental success to say the least. So much so that it was often considered the very first summer blockbuster. Even if you've never seen the movie, you know the story. A killer shark lays claim to a small beach town known as Amity Island, so three men team up to kill the shark and restore order back on the island before anyone else becomes shark bait. As I read the script for this video, I've come to a realization, and it's that reviewing this film is kind of tricky for me. Obviously I love Jaws and have wanted to review it for a very long time, but it's difficult to say anything that you haven't already heard. I'll do my best, I suppose, MediaMatt style. So without further ado, let's take a look at Jaws and see if we're going to need a bigger script for this review. The movie begins with an underwater POV shot of the cameraman posing as a shark. I mean, come on, we all used to do this when we were swimming in the pool at one point. At least, I know I did. We then switch over to a nighttime sequence where we see a group of college kids doing what they do best, drinking beer and making out. Which, as we all know, is punishable by law and is a sacred sin to commit in a horror film, especially slasher films. It's like ringing a dinner bell for a killer. Two characters from the group decide to go for a night swim. The guy is drunk and can hardly stand up straight. But as the girl dives deep into the water, we see that pesky cameraman getting closer and closer to its first victim. This scene alone has become iconic. It's the first kill of the film and it looks and feels horrifying. The way she is being pulled back and forth repeatedly and the screams of agony go a long way to showcase the horrors of this film in just the first 5 minutes. Now I shouldn't have to tell you this, but some of the best scenes in Jaws are often considered the ones where we don't actually see the shark. And this is just the first kill, mind you. The filmmakers have found many other ways to show shark attacks without actually showing the shark. We then transition into the following morning where we meet our protagonist, Martin Brody, played excellently by the late great Roy Scheider. The film takes time to establish he's married, a father of 2 kids, and is the chief of police for a small town known as Amity Island. It's nothing grand, but I appreciate the little bits of information. It goes a long way to making us connect with the characters. In the following scene, we find out the remains of the girl have washed up on the beach. The characters chalk it up to many things like a boating accident or drowning, but Brody has a feeling that it's something worse. He orders to have signs made to keep the beaches closed for the time being while they take care of the threat. However, we have a stern mayor that won't budge because, after all,
Amity is a summer town. We need summer dollars.
The next scene is filled with tension as we see Chief Brody looking for any and all threats. The beach is filled with residents, and we all know something bad is going to happen. Enough time passes and we witness a boy being eaten by the shark. This results in a town meeting to discuss the closure of the beach, at least temporarily while they deal with the shark. Obviously the townsfolk are upset by this. Always like that line. It's also here we are introduced to Quint, played excellently by Robert Shaw. He states that he'll kill the shark for $10,000 and not a penny less.
For that you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
Later that evening, we see 2 fishermen attempting to catch the shark themselves. They take some meat, stick it on a hook, and tie it to the pier in an attempt to catch the shark. However, in this case, they're woefully unprepared. He swims back to the shore as fast as he can, all while the dock is being pulled in his direction. This scene obviously is more for the tension and scare factor if nothing else, but I like the way that it's shot. Again, it's another example of how they actually use a creative way to capture the shark attack without actually seeing the shark. It's just shot very well. I love it. He manages to get back to the dock not just unscathed, but with some humor intact.
Can we go home now?
The following day, a group of boats and fishermen set out to kill the shark, but not before we're introduced to another highlight of the film, Matt Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss. The fishermen do end up capturing a shark, but Hooper comes to the conclusion that it's most likely not the same one due to the difference in bite radius.
What is this bite radius crap?
Hey man, don't look at me, I'm just here to review the film, okay? The same evening, we see the two head out into the open waters and see what they can find. They find one of the fishermen's boats, and Hooper decides to take a look. It's quite obvious there's nobody in sight. Personally, I'm not a big fan of jump scares. However, I've always admired this one because they just show it. There's no, loud sound effect, it just happens. And it's quite scary because, I mean, again, no shark in sight, but, still something that leaves behind an impact. I remember the first time I actually went and saw this movie again in theaters when it re-released with my brother, who hadn't seen the movie since he was a kid, and when this scene came up, he actually jumped into his seat a little bit. It was quite funny, actually. Back on the beach, Brody and Hooper are imploring the mayor to keep the beaches closed as the shark is still out there. But the mayor is only concerned with one thing.
Money!
Brody decides the best course of action is to have spotters on the beach to look out for the shark. All goes well until we see a fin emerge. However, despite all the residents splashing in the water and whatnot, the shark doesn't actually attack for once.
What's going on out there?
I swear, officers, he tempted me with Pokemon cards. How could I refuse? Shortly after, however, the actual shark shows up and eats its latest victim. Well, by the looks of it, somebody didn't skip leg day. This encounter was the final straw for Brody, as his son was almost attacked himself. He finally gets the mayor to sign the form and hire Quint to kill the shark. Brody and Hooper agreed to go with him, however Quint needs his fair share of equipment first.
Champagne, patty de foie, Iranian caviar, and don't forget the color TV.
Yeah, sure. Anything else?
Well, I'm going to need 12 jars of jelly, 2 cans of worm bait, and some tackles.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
And I'm going to need a video game console, some game cartridges, 12-pack of root beer, a couple bags of chips, maybe a mattress with a couple of comfy pillows.
Whoa. Hold on a second. I can understand the video game console and the TV for downtime in between the shark action, but like, what do you need with a bunch of pillows and mattresses?
Isn't it obvious? We're going to smother this son of a bitch to death.
Shit, is it too late to quit now? The men grab the last of their equipment, say their goodbyes, and head out to sea. Now, I love this film overall, but I think many will agree that Jaws is at its best when we're out at sea with our trio. They have pretty good chemistry, and this is where the tension is at its greatest, not to mention some of its funniest moments.
You pull the wrong one. You screw around with these tanks and they're gonna blow up.
Aha, nothing like some good old-fashioned foreshadowing. As Brody throws some chum into the water, we get our first good look at the shark.
I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chum some of this shit.
You see, I think the shark was upset because it was chum bucket chum, and I don't even think plankton would eat that shit.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Funnily enough, this actually is one of the most quoted lines in the entire film, and it was completely ad-libbed by Roy Scheider himself. It wasn't even part of the script. It's here we learn Quint's plan, to shoot harpoon bolts into the shark that are attached to some barrels. The idea is that the shark will eventually be forced to surface with all the barrels pulling him up. The following scene is another personal highlight, with our trio drinking and discussing scars they've gotten throughout the years. As they talk, Quint retells his experience on the USS Indianapolis and how his crew were stranded at sea for days on end while being swarmed by sharks. This scene is incredible, probably my favorite in the whole movie. It's got everything: character development, comedy, tension, and horror all wrapped up in a nice tight package. Even Steven Spielberg has said that this is his favorite scene, which I can see why. It was difficult to film because Robert Shaw was actually drunk while filming this scene. Frustrated with his acting and having to do several takes, Spielberg decided to just let it flow and see how it would go. Even Richard Dreyfuss himself said that he was captivated during Shaw's performance. The shark shows up to spoil their fun, and as a result, salt water gets into the boat and damages it. As a result, Brody grows paranoid and tries to phone in some help, but Quint doesn't like paying phone bills, so he puts a stop to that immediately. You can never go wrong with a message in a bottle. After shooting some more barrels into the shark, they tie them to the boat so as not to let it escape. However, the shark actually starts towing the boat, so Quint cuts the rope. The crew decides the best thing to do now is draw the shark into the shallows and drown him, but because of the damage the boat has endured, its engine shorts out and they're now stranded at sea. The men all feel defeated at this very moment, with Quint even throwing them a pair of life jackets. Yeah, this jacket's a little snug. You think you can get one that's a little bit bigger? Look, if I'm gonna die, can I at least die comfortably? I don't think that's too much to ask, right? Hooper tells them he can use the cage to get close enough to the shark and pump him full of poison. He descends into the cage and is quickly attacked by the shark. Hooper escapes down below, hiding on the ocean floor. Brody pulls the cage back up, but Hooper is nowhere to be seen. Shortly after, the shark jumps onto the boat and eats Quint alive. This scene is very difficult to watch, and not just because of the gore, but because of what it represents. For most of Quint's life, he's been hunting sharks out of revenge for what happened during the Indianapolis, so it's kind of poetic in a way that his obsession was his downfall. Brody manages to get one of the scuba tanks into the shark's mouth, and as it approaches Brody, we get one of the most badass kills in any movie.
Smile, you son of a...
Thus ends our movie. The shark is finally dead, the town is safe, Hooper resurfaces, and the two safely paddle their way back to the beach. Or they could have been eaten by those seagulls. I mean, that's my canonical ending anyway. What else can be said about Jaws that hasn't already been said? Of course I love this movie. Jaws is approaching its 50th birthday at the time of this review, and it still, for the most part, holds up incredibly well. I rewatch it just about every summer, and it never loses steam for me. Jaws is just a well-made monster movie with a lovable cast of characters and several quotable lines. If I were to point out any flaws that the movie might have, it would probably be some of the footage that they used during the cage sequences. Seeing actual footage of the shark and then switching between the mechanical one is a bit jarring to say the least. However, I can see why they used it for the time. The mechanical shark was notorious for failing constantly while filming, so splicing some actual footage of the shark was probably for the best. And I admit, while the mechanical shark still looks incredible, it does seem a little stiff nowadays. However, keep in mind I'm nitpicking. I'll always prefer this over CGI because it's right there physically in front of the actors, which makes it more believable. At the end of it all, it should come as no surprise I love Jaws. It's a timeless masterpiece that despite being rough around the edges, it has a certain charm that can never be duplicated with a sequel or remake. Jaws 1 was a pretty successful movie. It was a box office hit, it was successful, people loved it. It should have ended there. But it didn't. I personally thought the original Jaws ended on a satisfying note, which makes it all the more hard to bear that we got not one, not two, but 3 sequels. Jaws as a franchise has never really worked for me conceptually. I mean, sure, as a kid I wanted to see more Jaws films, but as an adult they just don't work for me. In retrospect, you can only go so far with the concept of sharks killing people for 2 hours. Hell, it was even joked about in Back to the Future 2 with Jaws 19.
Shark still looks fake.
So at least Universal Pictures is somewhat self-aware. With all that being said, Jaws 2 just kind of feels unnecessary. I know I'm not alone in saying that, but it does beg the question why there needed to be a sequel to Jaws specifically.
Hello, I like money.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that this movie was made as a result of the first one being so successful. From a business standpoint, I can understand. It made a lot of money, so a sequel was bound to make a lot of money regardless of the quality. I don't want to be all negative, of course. There are good things in Jaws too, though they are few and far between. For one, we have Roy Scheider back as Martin Brody, which is nice to see. We'll get back to his character later on, but I do want to say he was good in the role despite all the material he was given. Before I ramble any further, let's go ahead and give Jaws 2 a chance, because after all, that's what reviews are for. So, let's take a look at Jaws 2 and see if seconds are worth coming back for this time around. The movie opens with 2 divers searching the wreckage of the Orca from the first movie. We know nothing about them, and the Jaws theme is subtly playing in the background, so we know exactly where this is going. So right off the bat, I already have a problem with this. Now, the first Jaws didn't exactly portray sharks realistically, but it did at least kill people sparingly and only like one at a time typically, so it was more believable in that sense, right? But right here, it kills 2 divers in quick succession, so it begs the question, is it hungry or is it just killing people for the sake of killing people? I have a feeling this was done intentionally. After all, what is the #1 rule of a sequel? In most cases, it would be to outdo the original, and one of those things is the kill count. Martin Brody is late for the grand opening of a hotel that isn't really important, nor will it ever come up again.
Where the hell have you been?
Looking for a better movie to be in, I'm sure? I know I said earlier this scene doesn't have much purpose, but that's not true. We meet a lot of characters here. Or as I like to call them, walking, talking meat sticks. But hey, at least we have a guest appearance from Napoleon Dynamite himself.
Can you dance?
I'll freaking dance if I feel like it, gosh! I wonder if Red Lobster is still open at this hour. Yummy, 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 yummy. The following scene we meet Deputy Hendricks, played once again by Jeffrey Kramer. He's told there's an abandoned cruiser out on the shore, so he heads out with an old man to investigate. We then regroup with our teens as they're about to go sailing, but not before we get a little more characterization.
I'm thin, I wear glasses, I live in Amity Island year-round. I'm not good enough for her.
Girls only want boyfriends who have great skills.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, these characters are just kind of paper thin. They have almost no character outside of, I want girl, I want to go sailing, hey, let's drink beer. I get it, they're teenagers. And in a movie like this, it fits right into the 80s slasher stereotypes. But as a result, there's hardly anyone to root for here, and it doesn't help that they all blend in together. That being said, the actors do seem to have decent on-screen chemistry, so credit where it's due. Back on the beach, a girl is water skiing and is taken out by the shark. It isn't long before the driver is next in line. If I'm gonna go out in style! Seriously though, she just pours gasoline all over herself and then shoots a flare gun, and I'm just sitting here thinking like, I've seen this movie at least a handful of times, right? And to this day, I still cannot decide, was this self-defense or was she trying to demonetize herself? I have no idea. Either way, Brody is called to the scene of an explosion and has a sense of deja vu as he suspects there is another shark. As ridiculous as this is, Brody being paranoid about another shark isn't that far-fetched. It makes sense for his character. And imagine for a second that we didn't see the shark so early on, we actually as an audience can be paranoid ourselves. I know it's Jaws 2 and we're gonna get a shark, obviously, but I really do believe that they could have played off of Brody's paranoia just a bit more in this movie. Hendricks is ordered to keep dragging until they find something related to the accident. And they do find something alright.
It's a power line!
Huh, where have I seen this before? Some characters find a washed up killer whale on the beach with large bites taken out of it. Brody presumes it's a shark, obviously, but has an expert come in for her opinion. She doesn't outright exclude the possibility that it could have been a shark, but the bites aren't conclusive enough.
That another shark could come in.
Sharks don't take things personally, Mr. Brody.
Not if the fourth movie has anything to say about it. Brody goes to Mayor Vaughn, played once again by Murray Hamilton, to inform him that there might be another shark, but of course he dismisses it. Now, I'll try to keep this brief, but let's discuss the mayor for a second. In the original, he was determined to keep the beaches open for business despite the looming threat of a shark, out of fear for the town's economy failing. I know the mayor was seen as sort of a secondary antagonist, which is fair, but I never saw him to be outright evil. I'm sure he wanted the beaches closed, but he knew that would upset the townsfolk, and they would go out of business as a result. He even says himself that he was worried for his own children during the shark attack scene.
My kids will that be true.
Even a small character like Vaughn had an arc in the first movie which was realized when he swallowed his pride and signed for Quint to kill the shark. In the sequel, however, he's reduced back to his old ways and doesn't even consider Brody's word. I mean, it happened the first time, sure, but the second time around, shouldn't he at least be somewhat paranoid? Some might even say, like, well, he has to ignore him, otherwise the whole idea of Brody's paranoia wouldn't work. I disagree. Brody's paranoia could have still worked, even with the mayor on his side. It's even hinted at in a later scene which I'll get to, but the point still stands. Brody killed the shark in the first movie, and for the mayor to be so dismissive is frustrating to me. Of all people to dismiss him, it should not be the mayor. Back at the sheriff's department, Brody is lacing his revolver ammunition with cyanide, which, again, will come into play later on. He then asks if Hendricks can have the camera footage developed the following morning to see if the divers might have captured anything of value. Brody is up in his watchtower, eagerly anticipating the shark's arrival. He then sees a vague silhouette in his binoculars and doesn't take any chances.
It's just bluefish!
Admittedly, this scene is okay. It's an example of the paranoia I was talking about earlier that the filmmakers really could have played into. Back at the office, he receives a call stating that the photos are ready for development. With no time to waste, he rushes over and gets exactly what he needs. He rushes over to City Hall and shows the council members the photographs. But of course, they don't believe him, and as a result, he's fired. Now, for those of you who don't know, there actually was a deleted scene where the council members took a vote for Brody to be dismissed from his chief duties. All but one person raises their hand.
Anyone opposed?
This is confusing. Up until this point, the mayor has shown no signs of supporting Brody. Even when Brody fired his gun on the beach, Vaughn seemed deeply disappointed, scared even. However, in this scene, despite all the knowledge, he doesn't want Brody fired. Now, you could argue that Brody has had a good relationship with the town as chief, so maybe he was reluctant to let him go, and maybe that is the case, but his reluctance to even hear what Brody is saying makes it so contradictory. This is what I was referring to earlier when I said that Vaughn believing Brody about the shark could have worked, because he'd still be up against his peers, and ultimately the votes would cancel out his. Not to mention, it would show that he actually learned since the events of the first film. The following morning, Michael and Sean decide to go sailing, despite their father's wishes not to. I'm just gonna let you guys know, I'm gonna be skipping a lot of the scenes from here on out. They don't add a lot to the plot, and it just boils down to a handful of shark attack scenes, one right after the other. The following scene, Mike and Ellen are out driving when they notice an ambulance is rushing towards the shore. They find out a diver is suffering from a bad case of the bends after being spooked by something underwater.
Something must have scared him down there. He just panicked.
So much algae underwater. Never again. Fearing for his kid's life, Brody heads out on a police boat to bring the kids back to shore. It's here where the kids are attacked by the shark. Mike is knocked unconscious and is taken to shore for medical attention, but not before running into his father. He explains that he was sorry for disobeying him, and he assures him that Sean is okay.
You wanted to come. It's okay, wasn't it?
Okay, he feels sorry about Sean being left out there, which I guess makes sense, but I have to ask here, what was stopping Sean from going with his brother? I mean, like, really, he's being left with a bunch of strangers that he hardly even knows, so, like, wouldn't Sean be better off sticking with his brother as, like, kind of like an emotional thing? This scene has just always not made a whole lot of sense to me. I'm like, why wouldn't Sean realistically go with his brother? I guess maybe it's for plot reasons, and maybe it gives more of, like, an emotional reason for Brody to actually go out and pursue the kids. I don't know what the reason is. I've just always found this to kind of be kind of stupid. It's not long after that a Coast Guard arrives with a helicopter to rescue the remaining teens. Coast Guard for lunch. The teens are slowly drifting towards Cable Junction, but thankfully Brody shows up to save them. The shark jump scares Brody and makes him crash into the port. Brody then uses the boat's crane in an attempt to pull the kids towards his direction, but in doing so he pulls up a power line. The shark starts heading in his direction, and right as the shark bites down, it's electrocuted. Which I have to admit is a pretty badass way to kill a shark, but as awesome as it is, it still doesn't beat out the original.
Fire, you son of a...
So ends our movie. The shark is dead, Brody and the teens are safe, and... Well, I was gonna say that they made it back to the shore, but we don't actually see that happen, so I'm just gonna chuck it up to they all turn into cannibals and eat each other, so that's the end of Jaws 2. After revisiting Jaws 2 again, I'm still very conflicted. Obviously, I don't think this is a horrible movie like some people do. Hell, I wouldn't even put it in my top worst shark movies of all time list. Believe me, I've seen a lot, and I mean a lot of shitty shark movies in my time. And while Jaws 2 may not be a dumpster fire, it's just unnecessary. There are elements in this movie that I do like. For example, Brody's paranoia did actually work, but it doesn't really go anywhere, unfortunately. Beyond Brody, Ellen, Hendrix, and maybe the mayor, a vast majority of the characters were not interesting and felt like cannon fodder. And to be fair, this was set during the era of slashers with high body counts and stereotypes, but even slashers like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street had better, more memorable characters. They weren't exactly well written, but at least they actually had memorable traits. I think it was a big mistake to have the movie focus on the teens for the last half of the movie, as I genuinely think the first half is much more interesting, and entertaining for that matter. It's almost as if they had switched directors and writers between those halves, which I believe they actually did. Overall, Jaws 2 is just okay for me. It's not a great movie, but I will say it's easily the best sequel since the original, which if we're being honest isn't exactly a high bar to set. It's somewhere in the middle for me. If I'm doing a Jaws marathon, I can throw this movie on and be entertained by it, but that's about it. With all that being said, the fun stops with the next installment. You know how they often say that third time's the charm? Well, they're not talking about Jaws 3 when they say that. Released in 1983 and directed by Joe Alves, Jaws 3 made its mark on the world of filmmaking. And by making its mark, I mean that it was often regarded as one of the worst films ever made only worse by its awful 3D effects. For those unaware, the third movie in the series was originally pitched as Jaws 3 People Zero. The idea was that it would be something along the lines of a parody movie, poking fun of itself. However, the producers didn't like the idea as they felt it was disrespectful to spoof what was arguably one of their most influential movie series. So instead we got Jaws 3, a film that takes place at one of the Florida SeaWorld resorts and has a killer shark running loose. Or should I say swimming loose? As previously stated, the gimmick this time around was the use of 3D effects. During the 80s, a lot of movie sequels had 3D effects thrown in, such as Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D and Amityville 3D. Which is kind of a shame because the idea behind Jaws 3 is actually a really cool concept. A shark let loose in SeaWorld? That sounds awesome. Unfortunately, this is a film that's just bogged down by its boring characters, a subpar plot, and of course its awful 3D effects. But I don't want to get ahead of myself here, so without further ado, let's take a look at Jaws 3 and see if the price of an admission ticket for SeaWorld is worth it this time around. The film begins with a shark swimming into a gate that separates the ocean from the park's lagoon, causing it to break. Seems like a pretty big shark, huh? Maybe he's just trying to be smart and bypass all the lines. We're then introduced to our two main characters, Mike Brody, played by Dennis Quaid, and his girlfriend, Catherine Morgan, played by Bess Armstrong. We're then introduced to a British oceanographer, Philip Fitzroy, played by Simon McCorkindale. And as if we didn't already have enough characters, we also have Mike's younger brother, Sean, played by John Putch. Thing is, he's really barely in the movie to begin with. I mean, he's only really here to establish the fact that, like, oh yeah, we were kids at one point and we almost got eaten by sharks. Remember that? Yeah, I remember. We then jump cut to a park engineer jumping into the lagoon to fix the gate. Without an oxygen mask. Shouldn't he at least have a flashlight? Then again, why would he wait until nighttime to do this in the first place? Wouldn't it be safer during the day? Not to mention, I thought Mike was the one who said that there was no overtime. If it wasn't obvious, the shark shows up and kills the engineer. Whoa, that looks so awful. We then see two guys out on a raft. They're not here for maintenance or anything of the sort, but rather to steal coral from SeaWorld. Absolutely disgusting. I can't believe what I'm witnessing. Well, then again, I can't really see things to begin with, but you know what I mean. This reminds me a lot of the scene from the first Jaws with the two guys on the dock. It doesn't really add a lot to the plot, but instead to the body count. However, I do like how this scene actually plays out. We see one of them down on the ocean floor collecting the coral as the light suddenly goes out. The other guy gets pulled in, only to resurface and be killed for good. It's rather effective for such a small scene. Okay, not a bad scene, Jaws 3. You did a good job. High five. Moving on. The following morning, Mike and Catherine use a submarine to seek out the missing engineer. It's also here where we get some groundbreaking special effects. Whoa! Not long after, the two investigate a ship at the bottom of the lagoon. Then suddenly...
Here's Brucey!
I think I'd rather watch that movie, if I'm being honest.
What the hell is that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is that?
That would be known as plot progression, Mike. It's a hell of a thing. And thank God, because up until this point I've been pretty damn bored. The two of them talk with their boss Calvin about what to do with the shark. Mike wants to kill it, obviously, but Catherine sees the potential in capturing it for publicity's sake. They manage to tranquilize it and get it ready for the day of the grand opening, but it ends up dying in captivity. It's a sad thing, isn't it? The publicity must have been too much for the little shark. The engineer's body resurfaces, and after doing an autopsy, they conclude that there is no way that the baby shark could have eaten him.
Its mother did.
The shark ends up causing some damage to the underwater tunnels, trapping some of its visitors inside, so Royce develops a plan. He'll distract the shark, while Mike welds the damages to save the people trapped inside the tunnels. They lure the shark into a filtration tank, closing the gate behind him in an attempt to suffocate the shark. But of course, the cord holding Royce snaps, and he uses his stick to poke the shark because his wizardry skills are lacking. We then witness one of the most uncomfortable deaths in the entire series. Although it begs the question, how did he actually die here? Because to my knowledge, sharks don't actually have teeth in their throats, do they? Not long after, the shark somehow manages to free itself from the tunnel and swims backwards. Mike and Catherine manage to get the tunnel wielded just in time. They rush back inside the control room where we get our final confrontation. This has got to be one of the worst effects in the entire franchise. I mean, really? It's just an image of a shark slowly moving towards the glass. No tail movement, nothing. Mike and Catherine spot a grenade in Royce's hand, so they manage to pull it and boom goes the shark. The movie ends with the dolphins jumping out of the water. And freeze frame! Oh, thank God, I can take these off now. I was starting to get a headache. So, where exactly do we begin with summing up this movie? Jaws 3 is a film that falls flat in almost every regard. Having a shark let loose in SeaWorld should have been great. However, its 3D gimmick is what ruined it. Beyond giving me a headache, the effects just didn't work. They look cheap, and there are many moments throughout the entire movie that just show objects floating towards the screen for seconds at a time. So unless you're watching the movie in 3D, it just feels out of place. It's clear the 3D elements took priority here, which is why I think the rest of the film suffered as a result. Next are the characters. Now, I think some of the moments with them do work. For example, there's a scene with Mike and Catherine walking on the beach. He tells her about the time his family was attacked by a shark on Amity.
He hates the water. Remember that shark attack I told you about when we were kids in Amity?
Or there's the moment where they're trying to catch the baby shark and he gets really nervous about getting in the water. Sure, it's consistent with his character given his previous experience with the sharks, but beyond that, it doesn't really go anywhere. If I'm being honest, I don't even understand why he works at a place that deals with water and sea creatures to begin with. You'd think after the first two incidents, he'd stay away from the ocean or just get a pool. Beyond that, having the Brodies as the main characters felt superfluous. They could have been literally any other character and the story would not have changed. If I'm being honest, my favorite character would have to be Catherine. She had a lot of charisma and carried the movie for me. As bad as this film is, she did well enough given the material, so good on her. With that said, I can't even personally bring myself to say that this was entertainingly bad. For a majority of the runtime, I was just slumped into my chair constantly checking the clock waiting for it to be over. When it's all said and done, Jaws 3 had a lot of potential to be a really entertaining addition to the series. The effects are terrible, the writing is bad, there's barely any tension, and arguably the worst sin this movie commits is that it's just boring. While it has its moments, the execution as a whole was just poorly done. Hello everyone, I am ThatGuyMatt, and welcome back to the finale that is our Jaws franchise review. We've been through all this together, we've seen the highs, we've seen the lows, so how does the fourth one stack up in this franchise? Well, I think the most appropriate thing for me to do actually is to tell you guys a story in regards to Jaws the Revenge. So let me tell you a story. Well, one day, my mother took me to a CD warehouse, which if you don't know what that is, was, or still is, essentially a brick-and-mortar store that focused on selling records, CDs, video games, and of course movies. I didn't really notice anything out of the ordinary as I was straddling down the lines with all the Blu-rays and movies on the racks, but I stumbled across one movie in particular that caught my interest, and that was Jaws the Revenge. The thing is, I literally had no idea this was even a real movie. So, as a kid, I got excited because, as a kid, you naturally get excited for seeing another Jaws film. And I asked my mother to get me a copy of it. She said yes, as long as I finished my homework before I watched it, which I did. So we went back home, I finished up my homework, popped in the movie, and my god, I think that finishing, or at least doing my homework in general, was more exciting to watch than this fucking movie was. So Jaws the Revenge was released in 1987 and was directed by Joseph Sargent. And it tells the story of Ellen Brody, once again played by Lorraine Gary, as she takes a vacation to the Bahamas with her family. But after the death of her son, Sean, she fears that a shark is out there waiting for its chance to get revenge on her and her family. Yeah, the synopsis is about as ridiculous as it sounds. A shark makes a conscious effort to seek out a family that has killed 3 previous shark friends or family members. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into Jaws the Revenge and see how bad this movie jumps the shark. That's the best I got, I swear. We jump to Ellen, played once again by Lorraine Gary, and her son Sean making dinner. It's been several years since the events of the previous films, so the movie catches us up to speed. Sean is a police deputy, and his brother Michael is a marine biologist, but we'll get to him later. We then cut to them doing some Christmas shopping. Wait, hold on a second. Christmas shopping? In a Jaws film? Who the fuck thought this was a good idea? I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or not, but I do not like the idea that this film is set during Christmas. The film already feels tonally different because the previous films were all based during the summer, which make them warm and thematically appropriate films to watch for said time. Setting this movie during Christmas, however, was such an odd decision. Right as Sean's about to be released from duty, however, he's called to remove a log from a channel marker, so he sets out and is quickly attacked. So wait, there's already blood in the water before the shark actually bites down? Someone needs to report that to a doctor. I feel like that shark has some gun bleeding problems or something. That's not normal. I don't even know what normal is anymore. Shortly after, however, the shark comes back to finish the job, pulling Sean under and finishing him off for good. Now, I've heard some people say that they don't like the editing for this shark attack sequence, but if I'm being honest, I actually think this is one of the better ones in the whole franchise. Now, I know what you're thinking, yeah, this is a shitty movie, but let me explain. For a shitty movie as this one, I have to at least give it credit where it's due. If you don't care for the flurry of cuts and the editing, I can understand, but I think it adds a level of horror not being able to see everything. In fact, I'd imagine this is actually how it feels being attacked by a shark. Chaotic and disorienting. Not to mention the feeling of isolation with Sean on his own, hearing the Christmas carols in the distance, it's all really well done. The only thing I don't really care for is that Sean treats his arm being bitten off as more of an inconvenience of anything. So yeah, Jaws the Revenge starts off somewhat decent. Despite the out-of-place Christmas theme, it feels like they're putting aside the mess that was Jaws 3 and trying to give us another terrifying and tension-filled installment. But I'm gonna be frank here, okay? The first 10 minutes of this movie is easily the best, and if you're not even remotely interested, I recommend you just move on and go do something else with your day. For me, however, I have to continue. So let's get this shit over with. Following his brother's death, Michael, played by Lance Guest, and his family come to visit Ellen and comfort her. Now get ready, this is where the plot of the movie starts to rear its ugly head, and oh boy, you're gonna love this.
It came for him.
What?
It waited all this time and it came for him.
Yes, you heard that right. This random shark is now hunting the Brody family and is specifically seeking out revenge for killing its family or friends or whoever. Someone actually got paid to write this. Now, I really want to talk about this more, but that'll have to wait for later. For now, we need to establish something else. With the exception of Sean, you might be wondering, everyone's here except for Martin Brody. The writers killed Martin off between movies, and you might be wondering, what did he die from?
It killed your father.
Dad died from a heart attack.
He died from fear. The fear of it killed him.
Mom.
Martin died from fear? Are you fucking kidding me? The guy who killed 2 great white sharks in the past, you're gonna try and tell me that he just died from fear. Yeah, I believe that movie. I really believe that. Now that's what the writers wrote his fate to be. But you know what I think actually happened? They tried to get Roy Scheider to reprise his role, but he didn't want to do Jaws 2 to begin with. So I'm sure this was reaction after being asked to return for the revenge. Now, to be fair, I'm not exactly upset by the fact that Martin is dead. Hell, he could have just died of natural causes and that would have been fine. But implying that fear of sharks is what killed him is just absurd. Shortly after Sean's funeral, Mike and his family convince Ellen to come with them to the Bahamas. So you're thinking they should be safe right now, right? Exactly, because there would be no way that the shark would actually have a psychic ability to follow the family from New York to the Bahamas, right? People, I wish I was making this shit up. I really wish I was. We then get an appearance from Michael Caine, who plays a pilot named Hoagie. Not gonna lie, he's probably the best part of this movie, but we'll get back to him later. We then get a scene of Ellen swimming in the water and she's attacked. But of course, it was all a dream. Now, I'm not inherently against the idea of dream sequences as a whole. I think sometimes they can be effective and work. However, in this movie alone, there are 2 of them. Hooray. On Christmas Day, Ellen encourages Mike to give up his job as she feels it's too dangerous. But he tells her that she has nothing to worry about, as all he does is study snails, and explains that he works in warm waters in which great whites don't inhabit. But come on now, you think that's actually going to stop a shark from seeking out revenge? Not according to this movie. While out on the beach, Ellen gets a really bad feeling as she looks out at sea. Okay, look, I know I was joking earlier, but I'm being serious now. Does Ellen have, like, some type of psychic connection with this shark? Because how does she just sense it's out there? Nothing in this movie makes any goddamn sense. Hoagie shows up and takes her out for a good time of dancing and drinks. Nothing interesting happens, so we switch back to Mike and his partner Jake, as their boat is chomped on by the shark. The next day, Jake encourages Mike that they take a break from studying the snails and instead focus their attention on the shark. Mike is reluctant, of course, but ultimately agrees as long as Jake doesn't tell his family about it.
Do me a favor, will you? Don't say anything about this to my mom.
Mike goes into the sub to study some more snails, but wouldn't you know it, the shark shows up to ruin his fun. It then chases after him. And this is the funny thing about this movie as well. Despite most sharks being able to swim up to 35 miles per hour, it barely is able to keep up with a man that is seeking out revenge for. Does this shark just not have it in him to do it? I don't understand why the shark is taking its sweet-ass time. He escapes into some abandoned wreckage, and get this, the shark somehow manages to follow him into the ship. What the hell? Did it shrink or something? I feel kind of bad for this thing. It must be cramped in there. Mike uses his oxygen tank and releases the air to propel him to the surface. Now, admittedly, this is a cool tactic to escape from a shark, right? But wouldn't surfacing that quickly cause some bends or something like that? I don't know. I don't know. The very next day is the event of Carla's artwork show. And of course, because it's the climax, Michael's daughter is almost killed by the shark, but barely misses her and eats another lady instead. Man, this shark absolutely sucks at killing its victims. I mean, as of right now in this movie, it's only killed 2 people, not including the dream sequences, mind you. It's killed 2 people, and only one of them was a Brody. I mean, for fuck's sake, shark, you could do a lot better, couldn't you? Ellen has decided that enough is enough, so she takes Michael's boat out to sea, and once they find Ellen and confront her about why she took the boat, she says this.
It kept coming. Did you realize what you were doing? I had to do it. There was nothing else to do.
What the hell is she even referring to here? Was her whole plan just to go out at sea and hope the shark would be there so that way the shark could eat her, and then the shark would be like, "Oh yes, I've eaten my victim, so everything's okay now. Thank you so much." Fuck, man. Michael and Jake put together a device that will drive the shark crazy if they can manage to stick it in his mouth. I just realized how bad that sentence actually sounds. Alright, moving on. Jake manages to get the device into the shark's mouth, however Jake gets eaten. Ellen then slowly begins to drive the boat into the shark and Michael charges the rig, which causes it to go berserk. Ellen then rams the boat into the shark and impales it to death. No, actually, that was unfortunately the TV version. In the theatrical cut, for some reason, the shark just blows the fuck up. What the fuck? So yeah, the shark is dead, Jake is somehow alive, and they all make it back to the island. Ellen then takes a plane ride back to Amity, and that's pretty much the end of this shit show. How did we even get here? If I haven't already been able to convince you, I think it's safe to say that Jaws the Revenge is not just a terrible Jaws movie, but arguably one of the worst movies I've ever seen. The whole idea of sharks taking things personally and seeking out the Brody family for revenge is just as silly as it sounds. I could go on about how scientifically inaccurate this movie is, but I don't think it's worth the effort. Let's talk about the characters. Now, the fact that this is the 4th film in the series that revolves around the Brody family is already stupid enough on its own. Seriously, they need to stay as far away from the ocean as possible. But I do have to give the movie some credit with Lorraine Gary as Ellen. Even though the psychic stuff was ridiculous, I can at least understand where she's coming from. Her paranoia is warranted given how many times her family has been attacked by sharks. And while I do think it gets tiring, Hoagie comes in to ease her paranoia. I didn't discuss his role very much, but as I said earlier in my review, Hoagie is probably my favorite character in this movie. He just wanted to have fun and enjoy life in its purest form. The rest of the characters are alright, I suppose. The best I can say about them is that compared to Jaws 2 and 3, they at least have more likable traits, interests, and personalities. And now on to the shark, which is arguably one of the most important parts of a Jaws film, because after all, it's in the name. Oh my god. I thought the shark looked bad in Jaws 3, but I can at least say that they utilize it in that movie more effectively. Not to mention the fact that this movie takes place in the Bahamas and the waters being more clear removes a lot of the tension, as you can just see the shark freely swim through the water, and you can see it coming from a mile away. The shark also just feels like it's on sedatives the entire movie, which makes it really hard to believe that it's out for revenge when it feels like it gives up half the time. I left out a lot from this movie because a lot of it was just unnecessary to discuss. I mean, besides the scenes with Hoagie, everything else is just kind of dull. However, I do want to point out a few positives, as there are a few things that I did like. The opening shark attack was good overall. It sets a good atmosphere, even if the rest of the movie doesn't really match the tone. It was a horrifying sequence. Even though it's derivative of another scene from the original Jaws, I do like the scene with Michael and his daughter making faces. It wasn't a necessary scene, just like you could argue that it wasn't necessary in the original Jaws, but let's be honest, we all liked it because it gives them characterization and is just kind of charming in its own way. Many of the shots in the movie did look good. I'm not familiar with a lot of Joseph Sargent's work as a whole, but for what it's worth, he did an okay job at directing. The music this time around was tackled by Michael Small, which overall I think was fine. However, I do have to say that his version of the Jaws theme was pretty good. It builds off the original, and despite being familiar, it feels different enough to be its own theme. And that's really it. I don't mean to come off this way, I wish I had more positive things to say, but Jaws the Revenge feels even more unnecessary than the previous films. Even though Jaws 3 and 4 are bad in their own right, Jaws 3 at least tried to do something more original. And when it's all said and done, Jaws the Revenge was the final entry in the series and finally put it to rest. And what we got was a ridiculous, melodramatic, unintentionally funny at times, and worst of all, boring Jaws sequel. I don't want the word boring to be associated with Jaws movies. For better or worse, Jaws the Revenge has gone down in history as one of the worst films in the series and beyond. Jaws is one of my favorite movies of all time, but it's part of a rather mediocre series of films that I'm not too fond of. With all that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this Jaws review series. I had a lot of fun doing this despite a lot of the bullshit that I had to endure. And thank you to all of you guys for just watching the channel and for subscribing. You guys are an absolutely amazing audience, and I can't wait to start making more reviews for you guys in the future. That being said, let me know what your thoughts are on Jaws 4, and let me know if you have any suggestions for future movies or series that you'd like me to cover. Thank you all for watching, this has been Matt, and I will see you guys all next time. Take care.